Hello and welcome back to Jack Knives Reviews. I'm of course your host, Jack Knives. Today we'll be looking at the fan favorite sequel that everyone was apparently asking for, Five Nights at Freddy's 2. 1 year after the previous film, Abby Schmidt sneaks out to reconnect with her animatronic friends. Mike, her older brother, has to save her while facing off against new threats in new ways, unraveling the true origin of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. I've already reviewed the original Five Nights at Freddy's movie, and I believe when I did that review, I stated that I had only played up to the fourth game. I think I did play one or two other ones, I just can't remember the names of them off the top of my head. I've seen many tutorials, many behind the scenes things, I know the story lore, there's a lot of it. And a lot of it is left up to interpretation. Even the creator doesn't really know half of what he made. But as for this movie itself, it took the things that I criticized from the first movie and did a decent chunk of it good and another chunk of it worse. The primary thing that I really liked, that I wanted to see more of, was actually an engaging, fulfilling backstory. Yes, I'm familiar with the lore of the games, but I kind of wanted to see what an adaptation of that kind of the story would be. There were things in the movie that did almost verbatim copied the game, which is fine, but then there are things that it did that I'm like, okay, these are changes, but they're necessary changes, so I'll allow it. Which I think was done intentionally to firmly establish that these are two separate universes, the movie and the games, which I already came to the assumption of, but apparently a lot of fans were really shocked by. We're like, oh, well, that can't happen because that happened. And I'm like, I also like the connection that they established with the daughter playing a significant role, playing a more prominent role as opposed to in the first movie where she was just kind of there. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot, yeah, okay. Seeing more Matthew Lillard being a manic sociopath is always a blast. I love Matthew Lillard, despite the criticism of Tarantino. My personal opinions about his films, as opposed to him as an individual, Matthew Lillard is a national treasure and will always be a national treasure to many, many, many people. It was also nice to see him and Skeet Ulrich reunite on screen. Although, granted, their styles of acting have clearly changed. I believe Skeet hasn't really been given as many big roles, so I think his range is a far more limited amount compared to Matthew's, but maybe I'm overthinking it. The original cast does return, and there's some continuity issues I have with it. In the original review, one of my biggest criticisms was this is supposed to be an abandoned pizza place, like a Chuck E. Cheese, and yet the animatronics in the game, for example, look more, wear and tear, like what would happen, because, the styrofoam and all that stuff would kind of rot or rip apart or whatever, especially if they're walking around, and then they looked too pristine in the original. Here, they look somewhat better, but then there's also new models that they don't really establish why there's new models. In the game, it's because they went location to location, which is also not really much of a good explanation, but still. What I'm complaining about is kind of nitpicks, but they're nitpicks that sound unreasonable, but I'm talking about this from a first-time viewing perspective. A person who's unfamiliar with the games, watching these movies as a singular thing, it is confusing for a person who doesn't play the game. I did take a person who was familiar with the games, and I took a person who was unfamiliar with the games but saw the first movie. And they didn't understand how certain things were happening because they didn't really establish them very well. Did affect my review because I took both criticisms of both individual people as well as my own experience watching the movie, and yeah, there are things in it that I think are fantastic. For example, my biggest thing that I really loved was the puppet. the whole aspect of the puppet's abilities. I won't say any further than that because it's, kind of ruins a bit of the movie. But there were things involving the puppet that actually made it feel like a real horror film. It made it feel like an actual horror film where you're going, whoa, what's going on here? Because seeing animatronics jump out at you in a video game, or even seeing these big animatronics, they're scary, but they also look goofy. But this sort of weird supernaturalistic element actually come to fruition in front of you, that's something I can get behind. It is film. It's a show don't tell medium. In a lot of aspects they did show, and I liked that. But then in other parts they kind of held back a little. I felt like the movie was a bit confused. I know that there's most likely going to be a third movie based off of the success of this one and the success of the first movie. And I'm not discrediting these movies at all, and I'm not saying they're bad movies. They're not. I just believe that they're not for everyone. And I understand that. They're not even for every horror fan. They're gateway horror movie. Kind of similar to what I said about Good Boy, as they're horror movies to introduce a young audience into horror. And despite my criticism, they are necessary in the horror scope. So I'm taking all of that into consideration when giving my actual overall judgment on the film. There was quite a bit better in this movie than the first movie. It was about 60% better. That's a high bar. That's a good bar. I wish it spent a little more time on the showing and less time on the telling. It's kind of the same criticism I had of the first movie. Here it's a lot less severe. I think it's more of a matter of they had a lot at the same time that they wanted to put into this movie. So it felt less about them not talking enough or developing characters. It was more of there was so much going on that it took a lot longer to process than it would normally. But again, all that under consideration, I do recommend the movie. I give Five Nights at Freddy's 2 4 out of 5. Have you seen Five Nights at Freddy's 2? Let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to stab that subscribe button and slice that like button, and I'll see you next time.